In this video, I'm going to be covering part 1 of my two-part presentation of Judge Hugh Lawson's violation of federal law by disregarding Dr. Malachi Kobina York's sovereignty as an indigenous Yamassee Native American during his first hearing. On June 30th of 2003, Reverend Dr. Malachi Kobina York made his second court appearance in Macon, Georgia since the illegal raid of May 8, 2002. His case number was 02-CR-27-1. In this case, the presiding judge over this particular hearing was Hugh Lawson, and at the beginning of the proceedings he made it a point to reject the plea agreement brought forth by Ed Garland made by Dr. York under duress. After his rejection of the plea, the judge then asked Dr. Malachi Kobina York, misnomered Dwight York, "Do you understand what the court said about the rejection of the plea agreement?" At this time, Dr. York explains that he does not fall under the jurisdiction of American law, for he is an indigenous Native American. He supports this statement with his Native American credentials of being number 215/1993 under the United States Resolution. Now, by law, he should have been returned to his Yamassee tribe and have had his trial held within the Morris Cherokee Court Council. Even though this alone should have caused the case to be scratched and turned over to the Native American tribe to be governed there, his statement was overruled. Surprise, surprise. But let's continue on. Heading further into the case, Garland then motions to the judge a 15-minute recess to confer with Reverend Malachi York. The motion is granted and the court goes to recess. Upon return, Garland then motions to the judge that he would like Dr. York to submit to a competency examination, as well as to place on record his position within the plea agreement before the judge's initial question is answered. Keep in mind that the judge's initial question to Dr. York was, "Do you understand what the court said about your plea rejection?" as this question will have relevance later on in this video. Judge Lawson then asks if Garland will make the statement or if Dr. York is going to, and Garland says, "I will." Garland also says that after this is done, Dr. Malachi York would like to briefly be heard from. In typical fashion, the judge says he will not hear from Mr. York on that point. Garland then proceeds to make his statement that Dr. Malachi Kobina York is indigenous and sovereign and is entitled to the rights therein, quoting that it must be respected and promoted that indigenous rights and characteristics of indigenous peoples, especially their rights to their lands, territories, and resources, which derive from their political, economic, and social structures, and from their cultural, spiritual traditions, histories, and philosophies, convinced they're controlled by indigenous peoples over developments affecting them and their lands, territories, and resources, will enable them to maintain and strengthen their institutions, cultures, and traditions, and to promote their development in accordance with the aspirations and needs. Keep that statement in mind as we progress forward. Ed Garland then asked the judge if a document was filed with the court furnished by Dr. York. Lawson says, "I don't have the file before me." Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Well, after the judge says he is not going to go into the document being presented by Garland again, Manny Aurora submits his position on a competency exam in relation to Dr. York's sovereignty. Manny Aurora blatantly states that he is having trouble proceeding with the competency exam, as well as assistive counsel due to Dr. York's position of not being under the jurisdiction of the court. Lawson says, "I don't understand." Mr. Aurora goes on to say, "You have already heard what my client's position is, right?" Then Judge Hugh Lawson makes the ultimate blunder of this hearing by saying, "To be honest, I did not understand it. I hear what Mr. Garland said, but I'm not sure I understand it." Now, how can a judge admit their own incompetence in a court of law after they overrule motions and key pieces of information brought forth to them by the defense? If things so far sound fishy, then you're going to want to hear what happens next in part 2 of this presentation. Stay tuned.